Now, after the setback in the courts of law, it is back to the drawing board for government on the contentious housing levy law, which at the moment is unconstitutional. And so it is a race to organize cats and horses as Parliament embarks on a microwave season of legislation to fast-track a new housing levy bill that government hopes will convince the courts on the constitutionality of the affordable housing deductions. We dash to Parliament and in between the housing projects. And what a long week for the Controller of Budget, Margaret Nyakango, who, talking of control, was on the receiving end of an overnight involuntary intercity drive. Reprieve followed earlier today, but how far will it go? We set our crystal ball beyond May 2024. And there was a riot of an unusual kind and from some rather unlikely quarters. Honourable screams rent the air in Parliament as wailing members of Parliament demanded disbursement of CDF. But appearing before a less excited group of the same members of Parliament, Treasury CS Professor Njuguna Ndungu whispered, "We are broke." So are we? In our joint final word tonight, events around the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education examination results are something Kenyans should collectively lose their sleep over tonight. We'll tell you why. The News Gang is here.
I know the court have said we should go and readjust the law to make it aligned appropriately. That we are going to do so that the 120,000 people can become 200,000 and can become 500,000 in the next 5 years. Because if we don't engage these people in productive work, they will become a very big challenge to all of us.
All right, gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's good to be back after a bit of a short break, and quite a bit has taken place, including that matter with the housing levy. A lot can happen in 7 days in this country, right? So just a week ago, the court declared that unconstitutional, and on the same day, they stayed their orders. And exactly 7 days later, here we are with the government, of course, now saying, as we heard from the president there, that they will comply. So, Sam, tell us, what's happened today. Things have happened or evolved quite quickly in Parliament. Right, and it's exactly about 10 days or so since that judgment of the High Court. And obviously the argument was clear that the housing levy is unconstitutional because of the lack of observance of some of the provisions in Article 10 of the Constitution, specifically on the question of governance. But there was never an instruction that go and rectify. It was null and void. And therefore, it is interesting to see that now the government has presented a new bill, which was actually published on the 4th of December, which was exactly 1 week since the judgment of the High Court. So one wonders, is it that this was a bill that was already in the works, therefore in a span of 7 days it was possible to now roll it out? But now, today, there was the first reading, of course, the formal commencement of consideration of a bill. So at that time, it's just the lead of majority of the move of the bill, the owner of the bill, to come and say that may table it, and it is read the first time. But now the next processes are the most interesting, because now the committee responsible for housing and urban development, which is led by the Member of Parliament for Murwadi Kir, that is Joan Angeno, is expected now to deliberate on that particular bill. So it is expected that there should be a call for public participation to come and give their views on what they think. But also it's interesting to see that it is rare to find figures contained in a bill, because obviously the High Court was saying that there's no legal framework to support the creation
of the housing levy. So now we have a draft bill, or rather a bill already presented before the National Assembly, but containing those figures. Remember even the current conversation about the levy for social health insurance fund. The figure is not contained in the bill. The figure is to be contained in the regulations.
Right.
If you look at so many other laws that would require charging of certain fees, the fees always come in the regulations because also this is something that can also be changed. It is pretty interesting, and I don't know what the reasoning is to have such a key determinant of the fate of a bill to actually belong in a bill that is before the House.
In the law. So that would mean if they wanted to change it at some point,
it would require...
It would require amendment of the law.
Right.
But, you know, here we are, we've moved pretty fast. You know, Linus, does this then cure the unconstitutionality, you know, of the levy and the deductions, which is what was declared by the three-judge bench in their decision?
No, it's very interesting how the process has been basically rushed to ostensibly fix the constitutionality of the unconstitutionality of the housing scheme, basically. And it'll be very interesting to hear what the court will say after the 10th, because it stayed its own decision. What we obviously understand about the question of constitutionality is even a law, even a bill that can be passed by Parliament, if it's not consistent with the Constitution, then it's actually null and void. So the government is yet to cross that river because what the bill is going to say is also still going to be tested, especially considering that the petitioners have already indicated that they're going to fight in the next level, which is the Court of Appeal. And it's going to be interesting how that will also go. But of note, of course, is the government is clearly committed to push this as an electoral promise that it made and something that has already gotten underway. You saw the president talking about 120,000 jobs because they're basically saying, no, but we're already in motion. So let's quickly fix what the court found as an anomaly so that this can continue. And it'll be very interesting to see what kind of conversations we're going to have in those same courts after the 10th. Obviously, the question, one of the first questions that we're waiting to see is, will the order come in force on the 10th?
Yeah.
When now the court's own injunction of its own decision comes to an end.
And those are the interesting things. I was just writing down the timeline. So, you know, they had a stay of their orders, and the stay of those orders then expire on the 10th of January. Parliament had their closing day today. So they resume in February. That does not, however, mean that they cannot be recalled. But then there's also the process of public participation that is underway. It's not to say anything about Kenyans, but look at the time and the season that we are in. This is December, the 7th. You know, typically a lot of serious business activity starts to wind down around this time. But what is also interesting about public participation, and perhaps this was a lesson that you know, the government learned from the finance bill, law, was if you've noticed with a number of other issues, there is no oral submissions of you know, public participation. So there's no exercises like we saw with that, where people go before this committee, they, you know, make their presentations, and those are aired sometimes live on television. Now you will find with most of those, they're asking people to, you know, send in written memoranda. And, you know, I think there was also something that you had raised, Sam, a little earlier about just how the timelines are being rushed. So the date of the timeline of publication reduced from 14 days to 3. So you can see there's a big rush towards this. Yeah. I want to come back and talk about, you know, where we go from here and how this goes. But I'd like us to listen to the Deputy President, because even as the President was saying they, will comply with the courts. Here's what the Deputy President had to say regarding the court decision on this matter.
I'm aware that people have gone to court to try to suspend the housing levy and to sabotage the housing program. Much as we respect the independence of the judiciary, I want to request our judges to exercise judicial discretion and not sabotage that program.
So he's asking them not to sabotage the program. Well, he asked them to use their discretion, but don't sabotage the program. Oxymoron in that statement alone. Quite contradictory.
Judicial discretion is in that sense, because, I mean, really, on the face of it, it's the judges to express themselves based on what they understand the law and the Constitution.
Without sabotaging. So...
Is that guided discretion?
Yes, that would be it.
I don't know what that was, but anyway,
yeah.
Despite that statement, of course, that afternoon is when now we got the stay orders coming in.
Yes.
And in fact, if you're to reflect on the 45 days that were given by the court, it is curious because they expire on the 10th. Remember, according to the Finance Act at the moment, the remittances, deductions from your salary and the remittance from your employer is supposed to be deducted at the end of the month, but paid to the collector. In this case, I think it's KRA collecting for the Ministry of Lands and Housing, and has to be submitted by the 9th of the subsequent month. So the 9th of January, the deductions from December must have been paid. So I find it quite, should I say clever, to have the expiry of those stay orders being on the 10th, of course, as applied by the government side, meaning that the government will have already gotten the collections from the salaries of November as well as the salaries of December. And then, of course, you've already heard that there's intention to go to the Court of Appeal. I think a notice has already been filed, and meaning they primarily do not agree with the finding of the High Court. So even as they comply, according to what the President said, they already don't agree. So you're wondering, what is this then? You don't agree, but you're saying you're complying, but you're challenging the finding of the High Court. So there's something there that is... And
a bill in Parliament at the same time.
Exactly. Now the bill is in Parliament. But it is not the first time we're witnessing this kind of thing happening. Remember, not so long ago, we had the Cabinet Secretary for Lands, Housing and Urban Development that time, Zachary Njeru, who could not explain how the money that has been collected was being managed. I think the Kenya Revenue Authority is talking about some 59 billion shillings every year from the housing levy. The Cabinet Secretary at that time could not explain. He was saying that there are regulations that are to be developed. Remember, even during the discussions of the Finance Act, there were regulations that are to be developed. But I think even the government and the legislature found themselves in some situation, because how do you come up with regulations to implement the housing levy, yet there's no supporting legislation. There's no act of Parliament apart from the Finance Act, which obviously now has been deemed to be unconstitutional. And then now you have the bill in Parliament, which supposedly also allows the Cabinet Secretary to come up with regulations. I don't know regulations to do what, but we wait to hear what that means. But I want to remind you that it's not the first time we are seeing the government using the back corner to sort of comply, to catch the process way late. Some have said that putting
the cart before the horse. Yeah.
Remember recently, on the 7th of November, the Interior Cabinet Secretary, Kithure Kindiki, gazetted some figures, some numbers of charges for citizen services. There was a lot of hue and cry in this country. And in exactly 7 days, he had had a cry and gazetted new numbers, new figures on the 14th of November, saying that you've heard what Kenyans are saying. These are the charges that should take effect from the 1st of January 2024. We're asking the department to go ahead and conduct public participation and also implement what we have heard from the people. So public participation after the fact. What is going on here? Again, there are so many instances that you can touch on that you reflect of how the government is trying to catch the process way late.
Yeah, that's right. And, 7 days seems to be the magic number, Linus?
I think there's also the question of matters that are outside the law, because it's not all about an act. What really makes this bill contentious? What makes, not just a bill, sorry, what makes the housing levy contentious? What makes the housing levy contentious is it had not really won the imagination of the public. There's a lot of public resistance. there are a lot of questions that are pending. That why are you doing this? How do we get these houses? Who benefits? So, as we concentrate on the matters of text, there'll be the question of public trust in the process, because when you remember the questions that the public are asking, they're not exactly matters of law. They're just matters of trust and matters of believing or not believing in the whole idea. How many Kenyans are persuaded that this is a good idea? How about those who feel that this is another cash cow waiting to happen? How about those who feel that this is another project or fund that will create billionaires out of the political system, those who are well connected in government and those who are outside or in business? So there are a lot of non-legal issues that this matter actually needs to navigate. And I saw the judges cleverly, and can I even say maybe too carefully, distancing themselves from the nuances around the debate of housing levy. And they said something to the effect that it's not about the fairness or unfairness of a law, but about the process. And so I think there's so much that needs to be navigated, yet we have concentrated on fixing the text and fixing the text within a very, very short time. It takes a lot longer to build public trust and public acceptance that this is a good idea.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily going to be a law, like you say, in a text, but much more work needs to be done. Just, as we close, I'm curious about, so what happens on the 10th of January? Like we said, so that stay expires. So what happens by then? What are the likely scenarios? There's supposed to be, there's been a notice of appeal. So if they've appealed, then the stay orders continue. If they haven't, then what happens? Do we stop the deductions? Like, give us at least something with those scenarios. Linus, you're the legal mind in the room.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting period between now and the 10th of January. Stay orders are actually temporary relief measures. They're not permanent, and they can actually be lifted anytime. Even the same judges can actually, it ends on the 10th, and what we'll obviously expect to see is the government is going to, maybe to go back to court and say this is what we've done, we've complied, and start a fresh process again of trying to get the orders lifted. But what is likely to happen as well is the appeal processes are already going to be in motion. We saw Katiba Institute listing the areas that they are going to challenge. Yeah. And my own anticipation is this will go all the way to the highest court in the land. We'll see another big battle in the Court of Appeal. And after the Court of Appeal, whatever the outcome, we'll see this going all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is a trend that we've seen in this country. The courts have become a very interesting space of public discourse. And this is such an interesting public interest matter that has attracted a lot of general interest. You can put this in the same league as the BBI conversation and even the Finance Act. And so we're going to see this going all the way probably to the highest court, one form or the other, because there'll be some sections that will be, some battles that will be won and lost in the process. Because if you look at the public participation element, for example, the government won big in the recent judgment. Would the Court of Appeal see it the same way as the High Court when this matter goes there? So we have interesting times coming up in the courts again. Yeah. BBI, like kind of contests.
Yeah, let's see how that goes. It'll be interesting. Sam?
But obviously it's something that will be difficult for the government because even if this bill, as presented before the House, becomes an act of parliament, say maybe in January or even in February it's signed into law, it can only be enforced from the date of when it comes to effect. So it will never cover the government for the deductions taken between July of 2023 up until that time when that law will be passed. But the government has a stake to protect here because they've already received these resources, the deductions, especially from the salaried workers. And that's why they have to go to the Court of Appeal to appeal against that decision of the High Court. Even if they succeed to come up with an act, they have to go there because where is this money? Remember the Kenya Revenue Authority was saying that there needs to be a stay because they may be required to refund. They are not supported by any law. They may actually be facing some legal action because of their own action. So for government to keep the money it has collected, it needs a successful appeal, either at the Court of Appeal or even at the Supreme Court, failure to which, at some point, if eventually it's determined that these deductions were actually illegal, they may be required to give refunds. They call them rebates. Yeah,
and you know, what goes in hardly goes out. You know, and one of the other things that would be interesting, so, and maybe we're imagining scenarios here. So if it goes all the way, you know, to the Supreme Court and government wins, but then there is another piece of legislation and that is passed into law. So what, we have 2 sets of laws on the housing levy? If that scenario, you know, were to play out, then how does that work? Because on the one hand, they're appealing this. Let's imagine their appeal is successful. And the Supreme Court says, no, actually, the High Court erred and, you know, this law is in fact constitutional. But the speed with which we're seeing this other bill, that is passed, then it is law, but you have this other one that's also constitutional.
I think it will actually help.
Because you merge laws, that's...
It will help. It will help the government to the extent of now spelling a framework of how do you implement this. Because remember, the most stubborn question has been, yes, you're collecting the resources. What are you doing with them? So this bill appears to even suggest how much 30% will be going to the National Housing Corporation, 30% will be going to the affordable housing side, and then there's another 36% that is going to somewhere else. There's 2% that is supposed to be financing the board of these affordable housing. There's another 2% that is going to it will be agency fees for the collector of these resources. So I think in such a situation that both are found to be constitutional, then it's win-win for... Actually, total win for the government.
And I think one of the things that the court processes might help the country, first of all, is to actually isolate the issues. Remember, this ended up as a court contest as part of the finance bill 2023, because remember the housing levy did not have a structure like the court found out. So it was thrown into the Finance Act. So what we are seeing is the shaping up, and you could see the judges were careful to try and isolate issues, because if you affect the entire finance bill, which is the money bill that finances, among others, the judiciary, then you can actually end up in a little bit of an awkward situation. So what is happening is the sieving process. We're now going to see a more clear process where we're discussing the housing levy, the housing issue as an isolated subject.
Okay, all right, interesting.